Right, so Keir Starmer has been pathetically silent, let's put it, on the small matter of that pesky arrest warrant issued against Benjamin Netanyahu by the International Criminal Court. Particularly curious given his background as a lawyer, especially a human rights one. But then a lot of us on the actual left think, given his conduct as a politician, as Labour leader and as Prime Minister, that his belief in human rights only extended as far as it paid well. Now that part of his career is over. We're seeing the reality. A guy who got where he is with the backing of pro-Israel interests and as such owes far too much to them, and his policy decisions will always reflect that. So we should not be surprised that he has seemingly taken leave of his senses and is now seeking to undermine the authority of the ICC by trying to wriggle out of responsibility over those arrest warrants. He's hardly alone in coming to this position, but for the sake of Israel, the sanctity of the Rome Statute is put at risk, not just by him, but others too. And Starmer seems to think he's worked out a way of doing this whilst absolving himself of blame. He's found the coward's way out, if you like, by placing the onus on our courts. If he had a spine, if he was a truly independent Prime Minister, not bought and paid for, we could perhaps believe him when he said he respected the ICC and its remit. His actions say the opposite.
I'd also like us all to say with one voice that anybody who is responsible for these war crimes, and they are war crimes in Ukraine, will be hunted down and held to account before the International Criminal Court.
Right, so Keir Starmer there talking all big about hunting Russians down and bringing them before the International Criminal Court. But when it comes to Israel, he's like a church mouse, isn't he? He is now seemingly following in the footsteps of others, like the sheep he is, looking out for a way to appease Israel and not automatically arrest Benjamin Netanyahu or Yoav Gallant in the remote chance they actually set foot in this country. Let's also remember here that a Hamas leader, Mohammed Deif, also has an ICC arrest warrant out for him. Do you think Starmer would hesitate to arrest him if he came to Britain? Exactly. Such is the hypocrisy of where he has placed himself now, throwing the courts under the bus in a way to absolve him of any responsibility on this matter, choosing to duck for cover, whereas other leaders have more overtly said they will not arrest Netanyahu. So in that regard, Starmer's even more of a weasel than some of them are, but it also continues to damage him in the eyes of the British public. The basic gist of Starmer's position now is that if Netanyahu were to come to the UK, and that is obviously a very big if, generally our politicians go running to him anyway, and it's even less likely now, but if he did come to Britain, UK courts would consider a case for immunity for him when deciding on whether or not to enforce the ICC arrest warrants. This is a complete waste of time, a total nonsense, because whatever court has to deal with this pathetic farce will simply point to the International Criminal Court Act of 2001, enshrined in law under Tony Blair of all people, and that'll be the end of the argument, because this is a very simple piece of legislation. The International Criminal Court ICC Act 2001 incorporated the core crimes of the Rome Statute into UK law, with the exception of the crime of aggression. These core crimes, though, are genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. The latter two are what an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu has been issued for, so it is open and shut. Starmer is making a prat of himself completely, but assuming public ignorance on such matters, with the media failing to draw attention to this very simple fact. I haven't heard any of them mention the ICC Act, actually. This is a very simple legal mechanism which Keir Starmer absolutely will be aware of, given his past as a lawyer, and if he isn't, again, that makes you wonder what kind of lawyer he actually was then, doesn't it? Ultimately, Netanyahu isn't going to come to Britain, so this whole arrest scenario is largely a moot point, yet Starmer is continuing to make a meal of it. And you can argue there is pressure possibly from Israel over it, given the Downing Street spokesperson who explained this to the media also refused to confirm or deny any conversations between Number 10 and Israel had occurred. So we can assume yes then, right? There's another good reason to assume pressure has come to bear, though. If you look at the other nation that has recently announced that it will not uphold the ICC arrest warrant after saying they would, France. Now, France don't have an ICC Act like the UK does, but rather that defer to courts like Starmer has opted for. Macron has just out and out declared that Netanyahu has immunity in France on the basis that they don't recognise the ICC's jurisdiction in Israel because Israel is not signed up to the Rome Statute. This is stupid. We now know that France was leaned on by Israel, though, involved as they have been in the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire deal. France and the US now being arbiters of any complaints made by Israel during the ceasefire. And in order to get this ceasefire done and dusted and signed off on, a ceasefire which is actually just a 60-day truce in actuality, Israel made a French declaration of immunity a condition of the ceasefire passing. Quds News Network have covered this, an excerpt reading, Israeli officials highlighted France's position on granting Netanyahu immunity following an ICC warrant over war crimes in Palestine as a critical factor in finalising the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon, according to the Wall Street Journal. France, alongside the US, is tasked with overseeing the ceasefire. However, Israeli sources revealed that Israel initially opposed France's involvement in the monitoring committee. The concern was that Netanyahu could face arrest during a potential visit to Paris following an ICC warrant over his war crimes in Palestine. In May 2023, the ICC issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant over war crimes and crimes against humanity in relation to Israel's genocide in Gaza. France's foreign ministry has suggested that Netanyahu might have immunity, as Israel is not a signatory to the ICC's Rome Statute. The ministry confirmed that such immunity is applied to Netanyahu and other relevant Israeli ministers. Despite this, a senior French official clarified that any arrest decision would ultimately rest with a judge, should the ICC request it. France is effectively opening a Pandora's box here. ICC arrest warrants are non-negotiable. They are not bargaining chips. They are to be enforced by nations signed up to the Rome Statute. By doing this, every other arrest warrant issued against people from nations not signed up to the ICC as well are also voided in their view. That includes Vladimir Putin then, because Russia is not signed up to the Rome Statute. There is news out today that Chief Prosecutor at the ICC, Karim Khan, is seeking an arrest warrant for Myanmar junta chief Min Aung Hlaing on charges against humanity and war crimes against the Rohingya. Myanmar is also not a signatory nation, but jurisdiction is established because the crimes against those people in part took place on Bangladeshi territory, and Bangladesh is an ICC member state. So it doesn't actually matter how little that might have been. That's enough. And it should put into perspective this nonsense excuse that Netanyahu is somehow immune from prosecution by the ICC because Israel isn't a member state. You can't have exceptions, and the exception is trying to be forced through because certain nations don't recognise a Palestinian state, like the UK, like France, but that is irrelevant. The ICC has established jurisdiction, and that is the end of it. That is all that matters. The UN have recognised Palestine as an observer state of the UN since 2011. They've been signatories of the Rome Statute since 2015. So what is that worth if they aren't going to be protected by it? It doesn't matter if certain nations don't recognise the state of Palestine. They are recognised as such in law by the ICC under the Rome Statute, and that really is that. Starmer is attempting to do the same thing by jumping on the bandwagon of others to stand by Israel and not international law. It wouldn't stand up. More people need to know about this, and it needs putting to Starmer that his nonsense about immunity in British courts wouldn't be entertained for longer than it takes to say International Criminal Court Act 2001, gavel down, next case. Stop embarrassing us. Stop shaming this nation. And if you can't because you're compromised, then get out of the way. You're wasting our time and energy. Of course, don't let that stop you. You can go for any reason you like. But this petition that has been going around, for instance, shows how much of the British public would really like to see the back of you. Though, as with all online petitions, questions are being asked about who's really signed it, yet it might be about to be debated in Parliament after all. Shock horror. Check out the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.